The story of an anime or manga tends to be the most important part of how enjoyable a series is to many people within the anime-manga community. Not saying that having a really good narrative is mandatory for creating a great story, but it definitely helps more times than not. Looking at older series like Dragon Ball, Yu Yu Hakusho, and countless others, people traditionally look at them as anime with no substance, only about buff guys throwing hands at one another. While it's kind of a stretch to jot them down as such, specifically Dragon Ball, seeing as in the past they've had pretty interesting arcs with decent writing and continuity from episode to episode, they still weren't anything to write home about, for the time they were made at least. I won't discredit the fact that there were anime and manga of the 90s that had great stories, but with the passage of time, the standard of a good story has without a doubt been raised to a noticeable degree. Slowly but surely since the early 2000s, anime and manga have become more and more story-oriented, leaving little room for less innovative and well-directed series. Naturally, there are only so many great narrative-based stories, and others not so completely focused on a nice story would inevitably be overlooked, giving rise to the regular use of a term to describe those overlooked anime and manga: underrated. From here we could pretty easily get into what defines an underrated anime or manga. Instead though, in today's video I want to take a look at a definitively underrated anime, Gurren Lagann, and go over some of the things that make it special. Particularly the way it manages to be a great show in this age where good narrative is everything, without having some insane storyline itself. In a world where the surface of the earth has been overrun by beings known as beastmen that pilot mechs called gunmen, humans are forced to take refuge in underground cities throughout the world. As good of a solution it seemed at the time, there was never any fix to the tremors caused by these gunmen, and with the events of them being driven underground happening so long ago, everyone wrote this off as the occurrence of a natural disaster. Along with this, most villages blindly followed the directive of never stepping foot outside of these villages and onto the surface, basically guaranteeing the inevitable destruction of the human race. Though most people and villages obediently followed this rule, there were a brave few who were willing to go against these laws and step into a realm full of unknowns. Among these few are the main characters, Kamina and Simon, who constantly find themselves knocked down and punished at their attempts of escaping. Even knowing the fate that awaits them, they don't give up and continue to push to get to the surface. Ironically though, what gets them there isn't their own tireless attempts, rather a gunman who is causing trouble on the surface, crashing down and creating a hole in the ceiling of their village. They manage to combat this threat with the help of a girl named Yoko from another village who was battling with the gunman previously, as well as a mysterious gunman they managed to find within their village prior. Managing to take control of this gunman, the three defeat their opponent and blast out of their underground village into the vast and open deserted world, making for an extremely memorable and unforgettable scene. Yoko then mentions that she's part of a village that has taken refuge on the surface due to lack of resources on the ground, and fights in resistance of the beastmen all the while. Beneficial to their goal of exploring the surface and freeing others from their underground villages, the two decide to team up with Yoko and the people of her village to fight against the beastmen, thus marking the start of their journey. So with this basic summary, I'm sure that we can all agree that this is a story with a lot of potential to have deep narrative, characters, development, etc. You'd think the writers would take advantage of this in an era where a good story is everything, seeing as they have the formula for one in the palms of their greasy mitts. But surprisingly, they don't. Normally, a summary as long as the one I just gave would be the more in-depth and accurate explanation of what a story is about. But here, it's a complete 180. The short version is without a doubt a way better form of letting someone know what they're getting into when picking up Gurren Lagann, which is two dudes living underground bust out of their village with the help of some hot chick from another village, then join up to take down these super robots, which are actually piloted by chimera ants from Hunter x Hunter, and through nothing but sheer will, fighting spirit, and a little bit of elbow grease, take down all their opposition, getting into all sorts of shenanigans along the way. Gurren Lagann, while having the potential to have been one of the greatest written anime of all time, especially in a time where being well written gets you all the Chucky tickets in the arcade, decided not to take that route and never tries to make itself out to be some narrative masterpiece. In fact, it's such a lighthearted anime that most characters or scenarios that don't require much thinking can often be looked at as something that has tons of deeper meaning to it, sort of like an abstract Picasso painting or something. A good example of this would be how, for more than half the series, they power their gunmen with what they refer to as fighting spirit, when it's much more than just that. and the source of their power is an energy that is far more complex than they understand. In that sense, though it isn't all that deep of an anime on the surface, no pun intended, digging a little deeper, pun possibly intended, will show that this series can be taken as profoundly as the watcher's mind sees fit. Now you might be saying, Tensa, what does all this mean? It's cool that Gurren Lagann manages to be this series that doesn't try to be that deep while simultaneously doing so indirectly, but how exactly does it pull this off? How did the creators manage to get their hands on this secret Krabby Patty formula? And to answer this question, I'm going to use a quote that most of you have probably heard before, and something I plan on touching on in another anime video in the future. It's not the destination, it's the journey. As I brought up before, they do have the grand goal of liberating everyone that was forced underground just as they were through defeating their enemies, but it's far, and when I say far, I mean far from the only focus of the show. It's honestly pretty surprising how many tangents the show can go off on and still not feel lost in the main goal. From regular slice of life episodes to re-encounters with previous opponents, the essential bathhouse and beach episodes, episodes centered entirely around new encounters, and even whole mini arcs with great progression for both characters that'll stick around and ones we'll never see again throughout the entire story. It's incredibly easy to lose yourself in the individual scenes that happen within each arc, and you might even find yourself questioning certain decisions, statements, plot points, etc. that are so briefly and minimally touched on. And I'm pretty sure that of everything I just listed, there's gonna be one thing that someone doesn't appeal to, like more slow burn, cool-downish episodes, for example. But if there's anything I can promise about the show, it would be that somehow, someway, even when it comes to topics and episode types that you may not be a fan of, Gurren Lagann still manages to keep you engaged and wanting to watch the next episode. And if I were to attribute that to anything, it would most definitely be the atmosphere that the series has. Going back to what I said before, this anime puts much more focus into the journey than the destination, capable of taking whole detours but remaining true to the main goal. With this way of doing things, the atmosphere becomes way less serious and tense than other anime that are usually completely focused on the end goal. Pair this with a cast of all kinds of wacky characters, a great soundtrack, so on and so forth, and you get an anime personified by its incredible journey and atmosphere that also has deeper sides to it if you decide to look into certain aspects more. And quick side note, it's also really inspiring. But that brings us to the end of the video. To summarize, I'll say it's a great anime whether you're into deeper narratives or more the easy digest ones. There really isn't any limit to the types of people you could recommend it to in my opinion, but if you are the type that enjoys deeper narratives, I suggest not looking too deep into the show. It can surprise you how deep it turns out to be in some moments, but like I said before, on the surface it doesn't try to be an overly intricate story, so just lower your expectations for that. Anyways, as usual, if you enjoyed the video, feel free to drop a like and comment if you want. Also, feel free to check out the show if you're interested, it's pretty good. Let me know if you think I hit the nail on the head if you've already peeped it. Maybe come back after you've checked it out to let me know what you thought about it. But as always, this has been Tenta. Stay easy, guys.